Snatching a cheap, scuffed wallet from a clumsy woman on a crowded subway was supposed to yield a few quick bucks for Vincent. Even a ruthless mob boss who ruled the criminal underworld with a heart of ice appreciates easy cash. Instead of crumpled bills, however, he unearthed a ghost from his past destined to shatter his entire empire. The November wind in Boston didn't just blow. It bit through clothing like shattered glass. For Chloe Jenkins, the bitter cold was just another obstacle in a day that had already demanded too much. Chloe was a woman who took up space in a world that constantly asked her to shrink. At 250 pounds, she was used to the side eyes on public transit, the heavy sighs of people having to scoot past her in narrow diner aisles, and the invisible barrier that seemed to separate her from the bustling, fast-paced city. But Chloe didn't care about their stares. She had a warm heart, a steady job as a mid-level bookkeeper at a logistics firm, and most importantly, she had Tommy. She pulled her thick wool coat tighter around her broad shoulders, her boots stomping heavily against the rain-slicked pavement of the subterranean Blue Line station. She was late. Tommy's foster care caseworker was due for a home visit at 6, and Chloe needed to stop at the market to buy ingredients for a decent dinner. She clutched her oversized, worn-out faux leather purse to her side, her mind racing through her grocery list. A few yards away, a man was running for his life. Vincent Moretti was the undisputed head of the Moretti Crime Syndicate, a man whose name was whispered with a mixture of reverence and absolute terror in the back rooms of the city's most corrupt establishments. But tonight, Vincent was not a king. He was prey. A rival faction, the Russo family, had orchestrated a brazen hit outside a downtown restaurant. Vincent's bodyguard was dead in an alley, and Vincent himself had a piece of lead lodged in his left shoulder. Blood was seeping through his expensive tailored wool coat, turning the dark fabric a heavy, wet black. He needed to get off the grid. His burner phone was destroyed in the crossfire, and his pockets were entirely empty, save for a silver lighter. He needed cash, untraceable, physical cash, to pay a backdoor clinic doctor to stitch him up before he bled out or the police found him. Vincent burst through the subway turnstiles, his eyes scanning the crowd with the frantic precision of a cornered predator. The station was packed with commuters eager to escape the rain. He needed a mark. That was when he saw her. Chloe was walking toward the exit stairs, her focus entirely on her phone screen as she checked the time. She was a solid, sturdy woman, distracted and moving against the flow of the panicked crowd. To Vincent, she was perfect. A woman of her size and demeanor wouldn't be able to chase him, and her bulky, overflowing handbag was practically begging to be grabbed. He didn't want to hurt her. He just needed to survive. Vincent adjusted his trajectory, forcing his bleeding shoulder to bear the brunt of the impact. He slammed into Chloe with the force of a freight train. "Oh my God!" Chloe gasped, the sheer force of the collision knocking the wind out of her. Unlike a smaller woman who might have been thrown to the ground, Chloe stumbled back but held her footing, her heavy boots gripping the concrete. However, the impact caused her cheap purse to snap at the strap. It hit the floor, spilling its contents in a chaotic mess of receipts, lip balms, loose change, and a bulging, faded red wallet. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," Vincent choked out, his voice a raspy, calculated mask of panic. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder, and began gathering her things. It's okay, I wasn't looking," Chloe stammered, flustered. She bent down with a heavy sigh, her face flushing with embarrassment as people walked around them, ignoring the scene. She reached for her scattered tampons and a shattered compact mirror. With the sleight of hand, born from years of surviving the streets before he was a boss, Vincent's fingers closed around the thick red wallet. He didn't drop it into the purse. Instead, he smoothly slid it up the sleeve of his coat. "Here," Vincent said, thrusting the broken bag back into her hands. He stood up abruptly, swaying slightly. "I have to catch my train. I'm sorry." Before Chloe could even register the dark stain spreading across his shoulder or properly thank him, Vincent was gone, disappearing into the sea of grey coats and umbrellas, heading toward the inbound platform. Chloe stood alone near the stairs, clutching her broken bag. She reached inside to grab her transit card to pay the fare. Her fingers brushed against the lining. She dug deeper, panic rising in her chest. The red wallet was gone. "Hey!" she yelled, spinning around, her chest heaving. "Hey, he took my wallet! Somebody stop him!" But her voice was swallowed by the roar of an arriving train. No one looked. No one stopped. Chloe stood there, stranded in the freezing underground, with no money, no transit card, and a foster son waiting at home for a dinner she could no longer buy. Tears of frustration pricked her eyes as she realized she would have to walk the 3 miles home in the freezing rain. 1 hour later, in a dingy, windowless basement apartment in the South Side, Vincent sat on a metal folding chair, biting down on a leather belt. Dr. Arthur Evans, a disgraced surgeon whose medical license had been revoked a decade ago for malpractice, was digging the bullet out of Vincent's shoulder with a pair of sterile forceps. The room smelled of rubbing alcohol, old copper blood, and damp concrete. "Almost got it, Vince," Arthur muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. With a sickening squelch, the doctor pulled the mangled piece of lead free, dropping it into a metal kidney dish where it clinked loudly. Vincent spat the belt out, gasping for air as a fresh wave of agony washed over him. "Stitch it up. Fast." "It's going to cost you extra. The Russos are looking for you. Patching you up puts a target on my back," Arthur said, threading a curved needle. "I have your money," Vincent grunted, leaning his good arm against a rusted table. He reached into his blood-soaked coat pocket and pulled out the stolen red wallet. It was thick, a cheap imitation leather that was peeling at the corners. He felt a fleeting, unusual sting of guilt. He wasn't a street thief. He was a man of supposed honor, a boss. Stealing a working-class woman's purse was pathetic, but survival dictated terms he couldn't negotiate. Vincent flipped the wallet open. It was a chaotic mess, a testament to a life lived on a budget. There were punch cards for a local bakery, a library card, a stack of heavily folded grocery coupons, and a few loose receipts. He found the cash slot. $84. $80, Vincent sneered, tossing the bills onto the metal table. "That'll cover the thread, Arthur. The rest gets wired to you tomorrow when my men extract me." Arthur eyed the meager cash, but nodded, knowing better than to argue with a wounded Moretti. As Arthur finished the last stitch and began taping gauze over the wound, Vincent idly sifted through the rest of the wallet. He needed to make sure there was no tracking device, nothing that could link him to the theft if the cops had been called. He pulled out her driver's license. Chloe Jenkins. He looked at the small photo. It was an unflattering DMV portrait, but it captured her essence. A round, full face, warm hazel eyes, a double chin, and a smile that seemed remarkably genuine for a government photo. She looked tired, but inherently kind. Vincent stared at it for a second longer than necessary. In his world, women were either hardened accomplices, heavily manicured trophies, or terrified victims. Chloe looked like none of those. She looked like a mother, a neighbor, a real person. He moved to the next plastic slot. There was a folded piece of thick, glossy paper shoved tightly behind a faded grocery receipt. Vincent pulled it out, his bloody, calloused fingers awkwardly unfolding it. It was a photograph, an old, slightly damaged Polaroid. Vincent's breath stopped. The air in the basement room suddenly felt impossibly thin. The ambient hum of the fluorescent lights faded into a deafening silence in his ears. "Vince, you good?" Arthur asked, tying off the bandage. Vincent didn't answer. His heart began to hammer violently against his ribs, a cold sweat breaking out across his pale face that had nothing to do with the bullet wound. The photograph showed a man and a young boy standing in front of a sprawling oak tree. The man was smiling, looking relaxed and genuinely happy, wearing a casual polo shirt. The boy, maybe 4 years old, was sitting on his shoulders, clutching a small wooden toy car, grinning toothily at the camera. The man in the photo was Vincent, 12 years ago. The boy was his son, Leo. Vincent's hands began to tremble so violently that the edges of the photograph blurred. 10 years ago, a car bomb intended for Vincent had decimated his SUV outside a private school. His wife, Maria, had been in the driver's seat. She was killed instantly. The police and fire investigators had told him that Leo, who was supposed to be in the back seat, had been caught in the blast. The fire had been so intense, so consuming, that there were barely any remains left to identify. Vincent had buried an empty casket and spent the next decade turning his grief into a terrifying, blood-soaked empire. But this specific photo had been in Leo's little backpack that morning. Vincent knew because he had given it to the boy the night before. "Keep it with you, little lion," Vincent had told him, "so you know Papa is always watching your back." If Leo died in the fire, this photo should have burned to ash. Vincent's trembling fingers dropped the photo and scrambled frantically inside the cheap red wallet. He tore through the coin pouch, the business cards, the inner linings, ripping the faux leather apart in his desperation. A small laminated card fell onto his lap. It was a middle school student ID card. The photo was of a teenage boy, about 14 years old. He had dark, messy hair, olive skin, and a distinct, sharp jawline. He had a small, crescent-shaped scar above his left eyebrow. The exact scar Leo had gotten when he fell off a swing at age 3. The name on the ID read, Thomas Jenkins. "Oh my God," Vincent whispered, a sound so broken and vulnerable that Arthur took a step back in alarm. "Vincent? What is it? Is it the cops?" "He's alive," Vincent choked out, a single hot tear carving a path down his dust-caked cheek. "My boy, my Leo, he's alive." Vincent stared at the ID and then back at the driver's license of the heavy-set, tired-looking woman he had just robbed. Chloe Jenkins. She wasn't just a random commuter. She was the woman raising his dead son. A tidal wave of realization crashed over him. If Leo survived the blast, who took him? How did he end up in the foster system? Did the Russos orchestrate this? Did they steal his son to break him, only for the boy to get lost in the system? And what had Vincent just done? He had brutally knocked down the woman keeping his son alive, stolen the very money she likely needed to feed him, and left her stranded in a freezing storm. Vincent stood up abruptly, knocking the metal chair backward. The sudden movement pulled at his fresh stitches, sending a flare of blinding pain through his shoulder, but he barely felt it. His eyes were wide, feral, and blazing with a terrifying new purpose. "I need my phone, Arthur." "Now," Vincent demanded, his voice dropping an octave, returning to the cold, authoritative tone of a mob boss, but infused with a desperate, paternal rage. "You don't have a phone, Vince. You lost it," Arthur stammered. "Then give me yours," Vincent roared, snatching the device from the terrified doctor's desk. He dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Boss, we heard about the hit. We're tearing the city apart looking for you." "Call them off," Vincent commanded, staring intensely at Chloe Jenkins's face on the plastic ID. "I don't care about the Russos right now. I need an address. I have a name. Chloe Jenkins. She lives in Boston. I want her exact location in 10 minutes, or I'll gut you myself." He hung up, slipping the photograph and the IDs into his good pocket. The empire, the money, the gang war, it all meant absolutely nothing. He had a son, and he was going to get him back. No matter what he had to do to the woman who currently called herself his mother. The rain in Boston had turned into a relentless, freezing downpour. By the time Chloe finally dragged herself up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment in Rogers Park, she was soaked to the bone, her heavy coat holding the water like a sponge, adding 10 pounds to her already exhausted frame. She unlocked the door, plastering a fragile smile on her face. The apartment was tiny, smelling faintly of old radiators and lemon pine sol, but it was warm. "Tommy, I'm home, sweetheart," she called out, shrugging off the heavy coat and hanging it on the radiator. A teenage boy emerged from the cramped kitchen. He had dark, messy hair and olive skin that starkly contrasted with Chloe's pale complexion. He was holding a spatula and a half-empty box of generic macaroni and cheese. "Hey, Mom," Tommy said, his voice cracking slightly. "You're late. Ms. Carmichael from DCFS called. She said she couldn't make it in the storm, so the home visit is rescheduled for Tuesday." Chloe let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for an hour. She closed her eyes, leaning her solid weight against the doorframe. "Thank God." "You okay? Where are the groceries?" Tommy asked, his brow furrowing. He walked over, noticing the broken strap of her purse. Chloe swallowed the lump of humiliation in her throat. She wouldn't cry. Not in front of him. I had a little accident at the station. Someone bumped into me and took my wallet. We're going to have to make do with pantry staples tonight, kiddo." Tommy didn't complain. He just stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her waist, hugging her tightly. Chloe rested her chin on his head. She was a large woman, built sturdy and broad, and in moments like this, she was glad for it. She felt like a fortress, a safe harbor for a boy who had been tossed around by the merciless waves of the state's foster system since he was a toddler. They had just sat down at the small laminate dining table to eat their meager dinner when the heavy, rhythmic thud of a fist pounded against the front door. Chloe froze. "Stay here," she whispered to Tommy, pushing her chair back. Her heavy boots thumped against the linoleum as she approached the door, checking the peephole. Her blood ran cold. It was the man from the subway. He looked worse now. His expensive coat was gone, revealing a dark dress shirt, heavily stained with fresh blood. His face was pale, his dark eyes intense and feral under the dim hallway light. Before she could process how he had found her, The lock gave a violent crunch. Vincent, using the last reserves of his adrenaline, kicked the cheap wooden door open, shattering the doorframe. Chloe shrieked, but her instincts overrode her terror. As Vincent stepped into the apartment, swaying slightly, Chloe didn't back away. Instead, she planted her feet, squaring her broad shoulders, intentionally taking up as much space in the narrow hallway as possible to completely block his view of the kitchen and of Tommy. "Get out!" Chloe roared, grabbing a heavy brass umbrella stand from the corner and hefting it like a baseball bat. "I don't have any more money. Get the hell out before I kill you." Vincent held up his hands in surrender, coughing violently. I don't want your money, Chloe. I brought it back." He tossed the red wallet onto the floor between them. Chloe blinked, her grip on the brass stand faltering but not dropping. "How do you know my name? How did you find me?" "Because you have something of mine," Vincent rasped, his eyes desperately trying to look past her large frame. "Please, just let me see him." "Mom? Who is it?" Tommy's voice trembled from the kitchen. At the sound of the boy's voice, Vincent's knees finally buckled. He dropped to the floor, gasping for air, the pain in his shoulder radiating through his chest. "Leo," he whispered, a sound of pure, agonizing heartbreak. "Leo." Chloe stood her ground, her body a physical barrier, but her mind was racing. Leo. Tommy had been found wandering near the wreckage of a car explosion on Wacker Drive 10 years ago. He was deeply traumatized, suffering from severe dissociative amnesia. The police had assumed he was a homeless orphan, caught in the crossfire because nobody came forward to claim a child matching his description. He was placed in the system, eventually ending up at Mercy Home for Boys and Girls, under the care of a real-life child advocate, Father Scott Donahue, before Chloe fostered him. "His name is Tommy," Chloe said fiercely, her chest heaving. "And you aren't going anywhere near him." Tommy, ignoring Chloe's previous order, peeked around the corner. He stared at the bleeding man on the floor. Vincent looked up. The room seemed to spin, but his eyes locked onto the boy. The messy hair, the olive skin, the crescent scar above the left eyebrow. It was him. It was his little lion. "You're alive," Vincent choked out, tears spilling over his eyelashes. "They told me you burned. They told me there was nothing left." Tommy looked at Chloe, terrified. "Mom? What is he talking about?" "He's delusional. He's bleeding out," Chloe said, her maternal instincts shifting from violence to triage. The man was a monster who broke into her home, but he was dying on her rug. She lowered the umbrella stand and knelt beside Vincent, her heavy frame moving with surprising agility. She pressed her thick, capable hands against his bleeding shoulder. "You need an ambulance," she said firmly. "No cops." Vincent grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. His dark eyes met hers. Up close, without the rush of the subway crowd, Vincent saw her clearly. She wasn't manicured or delicate. She was real. She had flour on her cheek, worry lines around her kind hazel eyes, and a fierce, undeniable strength that had kept his son alive when the rest of the world, including his own empire, had failed him. "I'm Vincent Moretti," he whispered, the name dropping like a lead weight in the small room. Everyone in Boston knew that name. It meant death. "He is my son, Leonardo. And if you call a hospital, the men trying to kill me will kill all three of us." For the next 4 hours, Chloe Jenkins did the hardest thing she had ever done. She kept a mafia boss alive on her living room floor. While Tommy nervously handed her fresh towels and boiling water, Chloe re-cleaned and properly bandaged the botched stitch job the back-alley doctor had done. Vincent faded in and out of consciousness, muttering in Italian, occasionally reaching out to blindly grasp Tommy's hand. Surprisingly, Tommy didn't pull away. By 2:00 a.m., the bleeding had stopped and the fever had broken. Vincent was propped up against the cheap floral sofa, drinking a mug of sugary black tea Chloe had thrust into his hands. 10 years ago, Vincent spoke into the quiet, dark room, his voice a low rumble. A bomb went off in my wife's car on Wacker Drive. The police said Leo was inside. How did you get him? Chloe sat in the armchair opposite him, her hands wrapped defensively around her own mug. I was a pediatric nurse at Northwestern Memorial back then. They brought him in as a John Doe. I was wandering the streets, covered in soot, practically catatonic. No one claimed him. The blast caused retrograde amnesia. He didn't know his name, so the nurses called him Tommy. When he was transferred to Mercy Home, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I applied to be his foster mother. She looked fiercely at Vincent. I may not be his blood, but I am his mother. Vincent looked at this woman. She was out of place in his dark, violent world. Her body was soft and full, yet she possessed a spine of absolute steel. He had spent his life surrounded by ruthless men and calculating women. But Chloe's raw, unconditional love for a broken boy was the most powerful thing he had ever witnessed. I know, Vincent said softly, and I owe you a debt I can never repay. Suddenly, the absolute silence of the street outside was broken by the squeal of tires. Vincent's posture instantly shifted from a wounded man to a predator. He dropped the mug, drawing a heavy black Glock 19 from the waistband of his trousers. Get down! Vincent roared. Before Chloe could react, the front window of the apartment shattered inward, a hail of suppressed gunfire tearing through the plaster walls. Chloe threw her heavy body entirely over Tommy, pinning the boy to the floor behind the kitchen counter, using her own bulk as a human shield. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the burning bite of a bullet, praying her mass was enough to keep Tommy safe. Vincent didn't cower. He moved with lethal precision, ignoring the tearing of his shoulder stitches. He returned fire through the shattered window, his shots calculated and deadly. He heard 2 bodies hit the wet pavement outside. They tracked my burner, Vincent cursed, crouching low and crawling toward the kitchen. He looked at Chloe, who was trembling violently, but still covering Tommy completely, her broad back exposed to the room. Something profound broke inside Vincent Moretti at that moment. For 10 years, he had built an empire of blood to avenge a son he thought was dead. But his empire hadn't protected Leo. It had painted a target on his back. And now, the only thing standing between his son and a bullet was a brave, overweight, underpaid bookkeeper who loved the boy more than her own life. Chloe, Vincent said urgently, touching her shoulder. We have to move to the fire escape. Now. She nodded, scrambling to her feet and pulling Tommy with her. They fled into the freezing Boston night, Vincent covering their retreat. He led them through a maze of alleys he knew from his youth, eventually breaking into a shuttered, heavily fortified mechanic's garage owned by an old, loyal associate. Safe behind steel doors, Vincent made a single phone call. He didn't call his underboss to order a war. He called the head of the Russo family. "It's over," Vincent said into the phone, his voice echoing in the hollow garage. Chloe and Tommy watched him from a dusty leather bench. "You want the docks? You want the Southside distribution? It's yours, all of it. The Moretti family is dead as of tonight. If you agree, the war stops now. If you don't, I will rain a hell on your family that will make the last 10 years look like a playground dispute." The silence on the other end was heavy, then a gruff agreement. Vincent hung up, dropping the phone onto the concrete floor and crushing it under his boot. He turned to face Chloe and Tommy. "Your empire," Chloe started, her voice shaking. "You just gave it away." "It was never an empire. It was a graveyard," Vincent said, walking over to them. He knelt in front of Chloe, looking up into her tired, beautiful face. "I spent a decade destroying lives because I thought mine was over. But you saved my life tonight, Chloe, in more ways than one." He reached out, his bloody, calloused hand gently touching the side of her soft, round face. Chloe's breath hitched, a flush rising to her cheeks. No man had looked at her like this, not with pity, not with dismissal, but with absolute, fierce reverence. "I have money, clean money, hidden away," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. "Enough to leave Boston. Enough to buy a house in the country where the only thing we have to worry about is if Tommy does his homework." Tommy looked up, his eyes wide. "We? You're coming with us?" Vincent looked at his son, the crescent scar, a permanent reminder of the past. "If your mother will allow it. I don't expect you to call me father. I don't expect anything, but I will spend the rest of my life protecting the two of you." He looked back at Chloe, his thumb tracing her jawline. "If you'll let me." Chloe looked at the notorious mafia boss kneeling before her, stripped of his power, offering his life to her and her son. She had always felt invisible, a heavy woman taking up too much space in the background of everyone else's life. But to Vincent, she was the absolute center of the universe. She placed her large, warm hand over his. "We're going to need a lot of groceries for a house in the country." A genuine, breathtaking smile broke across Vincent's scarred face. The Moretti crime family died that night in the freezing Boston rain. But as Vincent held Chloe in the dusty quiet of the garage, the ghosts of his past finally silenced. A real family was born from the ashes. Did this story of unexpected love, dangerous twists, and a mother's fierce devotion keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved seeing Chloe and Vincent's thrilling journey from a subway collision to a beautiful, hard-won family, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow drama lovers and subscribe to our channel for more heart-pounding, real-life inspired stories. Your support helps us bring more amazing tales to life.